In this tutorial, we'll take a look at the functionality within the Extrude and Weave tool. We'll take a close look at all the options and the different results you can get from this very powerful tool. Now, the example you see on the screen represents the second half of this presentation, where we'll be taking a look at all the Weave options. But the first point that we're going to look at is all the Extrude options. So with that, I'm going to go to File, Open, and select the Extrude example.crv 3D file. And we will now be faced with a new fresh part which has a series of vectors displayed. Now, the first thing we need to do is to go down and actually open this tool. So from the modeling menu within Aspire, we have a series of creation tools at the top, and third from the left is the create a shape by extruding along one or more centerline vectors. So as I open that form now, you can see there are a number of parameters that will need to be completed before we have a component. The first of those options is the drive rail. So with that, I'm going to come across to my 2D view, select this sort of curved entity at the top, and you can see that's now selected, and I can come across to my drive rail selection and say use selection, and on the 2D view you can see that is annotated in green. We have the start point on the left hand edge, we have directional arrows moving from left to right and finishing on the far right hand side. Also, the rest of my form now is highlighted. So with this, I'm just going to switch off all the parameters so we can have it completely neutral, and I'm going to pick my initial cross section that I'm going to extrude, which will be this semicircular shape. So with that now, I'm going to apply, and we can see that that now has created something, but until we actually look at that in 3D. So now I've just tiled the screens here so we can see that shape that's been created. So it's taken this semicircular shape and it's been extruded along this curve from start to finish. Okay, so with that now, if I actually give that a name, in this case I'll call this Extrude, and if we actually apply and then close that form down, we'll be able to see from our modeling menu that within our component tree we have level 1 and we've created a new component called Extrude. Now with that, I can select it, which as you can see is being selected in the 2D and the 3D view, and of course I can have other functions including delete. So with this I'll delete the component, which will remove that from both the 2D and 3D view. So coming back to the tool now, I'm actually going to select the vector, okay, but rather than actually coming down and picking just the cross section and hitting apply, I'm actually going to just pick the entity and then click onto the end of the start point of the drive rail, and you can clearly see here that it's showing the positioning of that first cross section, and it's perpendicular to the drive rail, and you can see at the end also that we have the same shape. It's being driven all the way along, and we have the same shape at the end. Once again, the center is being placed directly over the drive rail. So with that now I can apply, so we'll see exactly the same as we saw before, and clearly you can see that single sort of semicircular cross section is being driven across the drive rail. Now we are using the same cross section at either end in this case, okay, so but I can of course change the cross section. So we can see if I go down now and select a different cross section, in this case I'm using this sort of quite large rectangular shape, I can come over now, click onto my end cross section, and clearly you can see that it's changed the shape of that cross section at the end, but of course we've not actually actioned this into a change in the component. And then I can just come down and press apply, and you'll see that change where it's morphing basically from the semicircular shape through to the rectangular shape on the right hand side. Now with that I can also move the vector, so if I wanted to move this now, I'm actually taking the cross section and moving it in, and then I can reapply. So I've not used the full extent of the cross section here, I've just used a portion of that. Similarly, I can come in now and add a new cross section in. So let's say for instance I wanted to take this sort of triangular cross section and add that into the middle here. I can do so. You can see that's drawn the shape there, but we've not actually actioned it there yet. So as soon as I apply that now, you can see that it's changed that shape. And of course even now I can take that now and move it within, so I'm just moving it along, and I can change the shape, and we'll see that change in the 3D. So we've looked at a number of different ways of sort of adding cross sections and moving cross sections, and of course if I need to I can also delete the cross section. This is using the sort of right mouse key over the actual cross section itself, and I can say delete cross section to remove that, and then I can reapply, and that's going to remove that triangular shape and just progress basically from the semicircular shape through to the end rectangular shape. Now, as well as being able to use the right mouse key over the cross sections, we can also do it over the drive rail. But before I do that, I just want to reset this component now, and we're going to take this triangular cross section shape and just place that on the first one there, and we're also going to place it on the end. Okay, and we're just going to remove the existing cross section here. So we've got that progressing from left to right. I'll now go down and action that so we can see this triangular shape moving from left to right, and we can clearly see that the red point on the cross section is being mapped to the red points on each of the two cross sections when positioned on the drive rail. So at this stage we can see we've taken this sort of triangular shape and extruded it all the way along, and of course now potentially I might want to sort of reverse the drive rail and have it going in the other direction. So with that I can go over the drive rail and say reverse rail. So you can see that the arrows now that used to be going left to right are now going from right to left, but of course I do have to action that. So if we have a look at the 3D view, you'll see that the shape actually changes because it is also reversed the cross section. So rather than the far side being the long edge, we've now got the long edge on the near side. So we've seen a sort of reverse, complete reverse of that component. The next option we want to take a look at is the sweep between spans, which is currently switched off. Now the best way for us to show this is actually to map another contour to the other end of the drive rail. So with this I'm going to take the sort of opposite of the triangular shape and map this to the far end. So as I select that now, you can see that the left hand edge here is being mapped to the left hand point there, and I'm going to apply that now to see the sort of initial progression. So if we twiddle the 3D view now, you can see the way it's progressing. So we've got this sort of sharp shape with the sort of long leading edge on the inside, and that's being mapped across. Now if you take a look at the high point of the first cross section, it's not actually being mapped to the high point on the far end cross section. It's just being mapped linearly along and then transitioning into sort of about a quarter of the way up the long edge on the far right hand side. If you have a look from the top, you can see that, you know, linear progression across, and once again from the high point on the right hand or far edge, that's also being mapped back into about a quarter of the way up on the leading edge on the first cross section. So that's not really what I would like. I would like really a node to node match. Okay, now the only way that that can be done is by having the same number of spans on each of the cross sections that are being hung or extruded along. So you can see here we have our two cross sections. They have 3 nodes and 2 spans, so they'll be ideal for us to allow us to sweep between spans. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to switch that on, okay, and now apply that, and you'll see quite a radical change to the shape. So rather than it being mapped linearly, we are going to get this progressing from the high point on the left hand cross section through to the high point on the right hand cross section. So as I apply that now, we'll see the change, and you can see that quite significant flow. So we've got a completely different shape now because the high point on the left hand or the start cross section is being mapped to the high point on the far cross section. Okay, so then that is possible with sweep between spans, but on the understanding that we both have the same number of spans on the cross sections being hung. Now if we add a cross section into the extrusion which has a lesser or greater number of spans, then it will essentially nullify the sweep between spans even if it's switched on the menu. So let's do that now. Let's select this sort of rectangular cross section which has 3 spans and not 2, and add that into the center of the extrusion. Clearly on the screen you can see that it's now annotated the 3 cross sections that we're using, 2 of which have 2 spans, 1 of which has 3 spans. So now as we apply that now, we should see on the screen that that will change the model, and if we have a look down on top of the job and zoom in, we can see that we are no longer matching high point to high point or node to node. We are simply linearly morphing between these three different cross sections. So it's not using the sweep between spans, it's just a linear progression between the three. So the next stage is for us to take a look at how we can modify the extrusion mid-command. We currently have an extrusion selected on the screen. We have also one of the cross sections here. So what I'm going to do now is just click into the white space and then just hit N on the keyboard to take that cross section and move it into a node editing mode, which we can see on the screen there. And now I'm just going to move this node upwards. Okay, so I've added in a node in the midpoint of that span and then just moved it up in Z. And with that, I can now obviously reapply this. So I'm just going to click into the space, hit escape to come out of node editing mode, then come up to the extrude and weave under the drive rails to say reselect rails. Okay, and now I'm just going to reapply that so we can see the change that we made by adding in the extra node and then moving it up in Z on that sort of center cross section there. Okay, so the next stage is for us to take a look at how we can maybe modify the drive rail. So I'm just going to click into the screen again and just hit escape and then come up and select my drive rail and just hit N on the keyboard to put it in the node editing mode. And of course I can then change this shape, move it around. Okay, and I'm actually going to cause a bit of an issue here by having a big twist here. So with this I've massively changed the tangency through this point, and I can now just basically click into the screen and then come up to the top menu and reselect the rails, which we can see on the screen. So it's reselected the drive rails and all the cross sections, and I can just reapply now. So we're going to see quite a radical change to the 3D extrusion, and we can see that there is sort of an overlap happening here. We can see that if we zoom into this area here, due to the nature of us having this radical change in direction and tangency. Okay, so with that you may want to then make a modification. So I can go in and then remodify, but in this case what I'm going to do is just actually undo the commands. So here I can go up to edit undo, which is also Control Z on the keyboard, and I'm simply just going to keep going Control Z until I get back to the original specification. So with that then I'm just going to close that form now, and now we're going to take a look at taking a cross section and using this with a closed drive rail. Okay, so let's just resize both of our views and get ready and come in and select the first of the closed drive rails and move up to the extrude command at the top of the modeling menu. So as we highlight this, I'm just going to hit use selection to use the drive rail that we currently have selected, and we can see here that the closed profile is annotated. We have the sort of start and end point in the same position, which is in the lower left hand corner, and we're going in a sort of counterclockwise movement. I now need to select my cross section, which I'm going to select just the semicircular shape here, and notice from the menu that create square corners is currently switched off. So with that I'm now going to apply the command, and we can see on the screen that we have driven the rounded profile round our closed drive rail to create the shape that we see on the screen, and clearly we can see that we are getting rounded corners. So if I actually want to move ahead and say I would like sharp corners, if I come up to the menu now, select that option, create square corners, and reapply, we can now see that we have a nice sharp corners in all of our four regions. Okay, so just like the open rail example, we may wish to take another cross section and add this into the component. So at the moment we are just using the semicircular shape all the way around, but let's say for instance I wanted to take the upper right hand corner and add in the triangular shape into this region. But what I want to do is make sure I add in the control in the fact that I want rounded in the top left hand corner and rounded in the bottom right hand corner, and only have the transition through the upper sort of right hand portion of the component. So what I'm going to do now is just click in my lower left hand corner there, which shows the mapping of the circular cross section to that point, and we can see that the red point matches the red point on the cross section. And I'm going to right mouse key now over that cross section, say add to all rail nodes. I can do this manually, but if you've got many nodes you may wish to do it by just add all rail nodes from one. So with this, I know that I'm going to have a rounded shape in my top left, a rounded shape in my lower left, and a rounded shape in my lower right. But what I want to do is change my upper right to be this triangular cross section. So with that, I can just pick that up now and then click on the blue node, which will then map that across. We can see the yellow node on the cross section matches the yellow node of the selected cross section, so we know the mapping there. And now I can come across and just apply that to see the change, and even then I can come in and further modify that by essentially moving that cross section down and reapplying. Okay, so it's very easy with a closed profile, just the same as an open profile, to be able to come in and modify and add new sections. The only thing that we cannot do is modify the start and end, because that happens to be in the same location, in which case we would need to sort of clear the rails and reselect a new cross section for that start point. So with this now, I'm just going to clear the rails now and move across and take a look at the rounded profile. Okay, so let's go ahead and select our drive and come up to the form and say use selection. We can clearly see that it's now annotated. We're rotating in a counterclockwise position, and our start and end point is at the top. So with this now, I'm going to select a vector that I want to use as the cross section and come straight in and apply. So we're going to see that now appear in our 3D view. Okay, so with that we can see the mapping. Now the mapping, if I click on the top, we can see the red point is being mapped to the red point on the selected cross section. So we've got the vertical face on the inside and it's tapering towards the outside. Now it may be that I want to actually have that reversed, so essentially we've got the large tapering edge on the inside. Well, the easiest way for us to do that is just to right mouse key and say reverse rail. Okay, now with that I do need to reapply the command. So as I reapply, you'll see that shape change, and we've got the vertical shape on the outside and sort of graduated longer length on the inside. Now, another thing I may want to do is to add in extra cross sections. Maybe I would like to put some rounded cross sections in the middle region, but of course one way I could do that is to right mouse key and say add to all rail nodes. Okay, or I can manually add them by hovering over the node or in any other position. So if I actually just focus on finding where, you can see there it's found a point there, and if I just move around, you'll see the cursor change and we found another cross section, and there we've also found another point. So I'm adding those cross sections at the points that are currently already on that drive rail, but of course I can add any other cross sections at intermediate points. So with that, as I apply that, there'll be no change because we've got the same profile being used on all four of those sort of cross section positions. But now I may want to come in and add in the rounded cross section. So I'm going to select that on the 2D view and come across and map this to the right hand cross section, and you can see it's matching yellow to yellow, so we know the orientation, although it doesn't matter of course with this sort of rounded shape. And I'm going to also add it onto the left hand side as well. So what are we going to get here? We've got a triangular shape at the top. It's going to be transitioning to a rounded shape at sort of the 3 o'clock position, and then back to the triangular shape at the 6 o'clock position, back to the rounded at the 9 o'clock position, and then back to the triangular section at sort of the midnight position. So with that I can now apply, and we can see that change, and we can see that's really quite a unique shape. And of course I can still then reverse the rail and reapply, and we can explore another shape. Okay, so we've taken a look at a lot of the control that we have over the extrusion component, but one thing we've not explored yet is not just the ability to use a cross-section shape for the extrusion component, but actually to use a component. So with this, I'm going to clear the rails, and we're going to look to now read in a component that we will then use to extrude along the drive rail. So first we need to close the form and then come up to the modeling menu and select the import a component or 3D model. From our number of options here, I'm going to select this grape leaf 3D clip file, and that's going to be brought in. We can see it in the lower left hand corner, so I'm just going to use the alignment tools to bring it into the center. And clearly this is very big, so I'm going to reselect it now and just resize it. So I'm going to say specify a height of just 1.5, link XY on so the width scales in proportion, and that looks to be a nice size. With that, I'm going to close the form, select the drive rail now, come up to the extrude command, use selection. We can see that it's going from left to right and we have a start point on the left, and we're not going to use the vector cross sections but use a component. From our drop down menu there is only one, okay, and we're going to fill with multiple copies with no overlap. So as one ends, the next one starts, and we'll apply. Okay, so that looks okay, but I ideally want the base of my leaf to be centered around the middle of the drive rail. So clearly the orientation of my sort of donor leaf is not correct. So I'm just going to clear those rails now and close that down. Take the leaf, go into the rotation tool now and just apply a rotation of 90. Close that down, come back and select my drive rail and up into the form again. Use selection, pick the component, and now we should have, once we've applied this, the correct orientation. Okay, so I'm happy with that at the moment, but it just looks a little bit odd with there being sort of a small gap in between, even though 0% has been specified. Ideally I'd like them overlapping, so I'm going to put an overlap there of 30% and apply. And if we take a look, we can see that everything is merging together. So although we have add set in our combine with other components set to add, the items themselves are merging together in the command. So I kind of like what we're seeing there, but really I want the sort of the first leaf here to be slightly higher at the sort of right hand edge, so it sits on top of the next leaf. So it's as if each leaf is sort of laid on top of the next. So actually what I'm going to do is just clear those rails now, and we're going to come back to the main view there so we can see our component, close the form down, select the component, and we're just going to adjust it, adjust its tilt angle. So I'm going to come up to the properties of the component and specify a tilt, and that tilt, I'm just going to specify the angle from this side to this side, and we're going to specify that maybe at an angle of 5. Okay, and we should see that if we tilt that round, you can see that tilt being specified there. So I'm happy with that now. I can close the form down and then come back into the drive rail, select the command, and then pick up the component again, and we'll keep the same 30% and apply. So with that, we can come in and see, we can clearly see that the front edge of the leaf is overlapping the next edge, so that looks kind of nice the way they're overlapping. But what I'd also like to explore from the menu is this option of flip alternate copies. Okay, so we can see here flip alternate copies is currently switched off. If I switch that on and apply, it won't really show that well here. So basically it's flipping them left and right, not back to front but left to right, but it doesn't show well here because the leaf sort of looks roughly the same on the left and right edge. But if we rotate the leaf, then this will show a greater difference. So with that, I'm just going to clear the rails there now and then just close that out and quickly pick up our leaf and just rotate it so the sort of tip is roughly around about 4:30, 5 o'clock. Okay, maybe a little bit more, and come back in now and select my drive rail into the command and then pick up the component. We've got flip alternate copy switched on and apply, and clearly you can see here that we're getting one leaf being flipped towards the top, the next one down, so it's sort of going sort of 45 degrees almost, going left and right along that drive rail, and that's done by selecting the flip alternate copies from the menu. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take a look at really taking a component and putting it around a closed profile. So with this, I'll just reset the model and we'll just close the form and just bring this back into the correct view, ready to start taking a look at the next option. So let's select our closed profile and come back up to the extrude command and select that as our drive rail. Now we're going to come down and pick our component here, but as soon as you can see, we're going to have issues really with how that component sort of extrudes around that corner, in the fact that we're going to have an area where there's going to be quite a lot of overlap between the components. So if I leave that maybe at a percent of just say maybe 20% overlap and now apply that, okay, you're seeing that we're getting some level of distortion in the corners, so we're not really getting a particularly good representation in the corners by the nature of the way that it's extruding around there. Ideally what we want is a sort of consistent profile where we know we're going to get consistent spacing and a consistent look, and we'll get that with this oval here. So what I'll do is I'll clear those rails and come across and select the oval now and use selection on that, and just go straight ahead. We're using the component and apply, and you can see now that we're going to get a much better result from that. So once that's displayed, you can see that on the screen there, and we're getting a nice consistent representation around there. If we don't want to flip copies, of course we can switch to alternate that off, and then we're going to get just the same orientation from each leaf. Okay, so with that, I'm sort of happy with using those components around that rounded profile, but of course with the sharp edged square profile we are getting distortion in the corners, which wasn't giving us the kind of representation we needed. So at this point we've explored all the different types of extrude options, and now we're going to move across and take a look at our weave example. Okay, so let's go and close down the form now, and actually we are going to open a new part. So I'm going to file open, and we're going to pick up the weave example.crv 3D file, and immediately we'll be presented once again with some crisscross vectors in the middle of the screen and some cross sections at the top. Okay, so let's go across and open up the extrude and weave command, and I'm going to first pick our drive rails. We have multiple drive rails here. I'll click use selection. We can see that we have the two horizontal drive rails running from left to right. We can see our start points, and we have our two vertical drive rails running from bottom to top as shown with the arrows. So I'm going to come up to the top now and immediately select my cross section, which is going to be the sort of box section shape. And I'm going to go straight away and actually not use the weave command, just going to use the standard extrusion, and I'm going to apply this now. So I'm going to tile the window so we can see the 3D view, and just rotate this so we can take a look at the result. And essentially we've got where each of the sort of extrusions are merging into each other. There's no concept of a weave, it's just simply they are mating and running through each other. And essentially we've got like almost a prison gate type look rather than a nice weave example. So if we come back to our form now, there is a section here called weave under over at crossings, okay, on the left hand side. So I'm going to select that now, and we're going to just use the scale shape command, and I've specified here the under and over to be 100%. So essentially I'm saying don't make a change. So with this, as I apply now, you can see there is no change to that because we have not scaled either of the sort of extrusions in terms of their under and over. So let's come back to the form now and look at these separately. So I'm going to take the under now and just scale that from 100% down to 50. So what is this going to mean? It means that essentially when passing over a crossing, then the upper beam is not scaled in any way, and it's only for that item going under that is then sort of compacted down to be 50% of its thickness. So when I apply that now, you'll see that effect. So if we have a look on the 3D view, you can see that the actual height of the sort of top section here remains the same, and as it comes across, it then starts to dip down to about 50% as it passes under, and then starts to increase back up. So essentially we are only modifying the sections that are running underneath. Okay, so the Z under has been scaled to be 50% of what it originally was, so we've halved it in these areas. Now as well as that, if I actually put this back to 100%, okay, and you'll see that we're going to get this back as it was before, and now we're going to look at the over. So the over is going to be increased to 150. So essentially what we are doing there is increasing the region when it's passing over to be another 50% higher than what it was originally. Okay, so we can see in this case here, this is passing over this one here, you know, this is passing over this one here, and we've got an increase in height there. Okay, so there we are using just the Z over value. But of course, what we ideally want is to use a combination of these to get the true weave feel. So I'm going to come over to the weave and just scale the Z under from 100 to 50 and apply. And then you can start to see that we're getting quite a nice effect there. Now, this works okay with the sort of box section shape where we're using 50% here, because it's a sort of a flat-edged front to the weave, so that looks okay. But if I now come in and select, for instance, my rounded shape and apply with these same values, and we have a look, we can see that it's actually, we're still getting some sort of level of sort of merging here, and really our sort of weave looks like it's having a little bit of material taken away from it. Now we don't want that. We really want the lateral and the verticals to be laying on top of each other and not sort of merging in. So we need to look at the weave under and over at the crossings and make some changes. So in order to initiate those changes, I'm going to come back to the form and actually lower the Z under from 50 to 30 and raise the Z over from 150 to 170. Okay, so with that I'll apply now, and you'll see that we've got a better effect. It really does feel like each of them are rolling over and there isn't really an intersection between the two. Now this only really works because of the shape that we're using. The cross-section shape is rounded here, so as we are using the scale shape under the weave option, where we're massively scaling it both in terms of the Z under and the Z over from 30 to 170, but it still looks okay visually in the 3D. Now as soon as I select a different shape, this sort of rather curved shape here for the cross-section, and apply, you'll see that the result when I look at it in 3D is not really a good desired effect. It's because we are massively distorting the shape itself in terms of scaling it in the Z over by 170 and sort of flattening it to 30% with the Z under. So where we've got more of a change in the shape, then the scale shape command isn't actually the best option. What we do want to do is maybe select the add base. So with this now, I'm going to select add base, and we've got Z under and over again, but actually for the under, I'm just going to leave that as 0, and we're going to have the Z over at 100%. So as I apply this now, we're going to see that we get a very much a different effect where we've protected the shape, but we're still getting the nice weave command. And all we've done is we've added a base to the over. So we've increased that by essentially 100%, so it's double its height, but we've protected the shape by simply adding a base underneath. So you can see here that the Z under has remained the same, but the Z over has increased by 100%, so it's essentially doubled in height. So we now have the under and over look that we were looking from, that we couldn't get using the scale shape, but we have with the add base. Although we're looking at the weave section of this function, we do have access to the same tools that we had with the extrude. So what I'm going to do is map this sort of ridge shape into the start and end point of all the drive rails, so we can see that there. And if I reapply at this point, of course there will be no change because we've not made any changes to those cross sections. But what we're going to do is take these two vertical drive rails and map different cross sections to them. So I'm going to come over and select the semicircular shape and just come and click now on the blue node at the top and bottom, so we can see which point is being mapped to which, so yellow to yellow. And then I'm going to go across to the drive rail next to it and select the box cross section and just map that to top and bottom. Okay, and then come across and apply. So now we'll have quite a different effect. We've got the two lateral drive rails that are using the ridge shape, and then we've got one vertical with the rounded and one vertical with the box section. And we can even add in further cross sections at intermediate points. So here I'm going to select the ridge shape, come in now and set roughly around about halfway, let's say, and put a cross section in. So the net effect will be that we will progress from the rounded shape through to the full ridge shape in the middle, and then back to the rounded shape. So when I apply now, you can now see that on the screen, and we've got a really quite a cool effect where we've changed the sort of weave in the middle, and it's morphing out to the rounded shapes at either end. At this point, let's take a look at how we can control the way the different drive rails run over and under each other. So with this, I'm just going to close down the form, and we can see that we have a component in our tree here. I'm going to select that right mouse key and delete, and now we're going to come back in to the command. But what I need to do first is actually to control which vector I select first, as it will be that vector that we will reverse later in order to change the way it goes under and over. Okay, so let's pick the first vector, which will be our first vertical drive rail, and then shift and pick the other three. And now going to come back into the modeling form and pick the extrude option and use selection to select those vectors, and then come straight in and pick the cross section and go straight to apply. So we can see in the 3D view, if we take a look at that first drive rail, it's going over at the start and then drops down to under as it progresses to the other end. Now I can change that, so if we have a look here, I can right mouse key over that drive rail and say reverse rail. Now we're not going to see a change in the 3D view till I apply, but if you concentrate on the 3D view and I hit apply now, you'll see quite a significant change where now it's going under the start and then over after. And if I reverse it again, you'll see the change again, and we're now going to change that to being over at the start and under at the second. So that first drive rail is sort of controlling what is happening all over the job. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take a look at a more complex example using the sort of same profile but using a completely different shape. So I'm going to close out of this form, and we're going to just delete the component that we've just created, and then come back up to our layers, and I'm going to switch off the simple weave and switch on the circle weave and make that the active layer. So now we have a series of drive rails all overlapping. It was created by initially taking one circle and then mirroring that across, and then mirroring it from top to bottom to create the bottom two. So it's pretty simple now, and of course I'm just going to box pick to pick these 4 drive rails, come back into the command now and use selection on those, come straight in and pick the cross section, leave everything the same and just apply. So we can see that even though we've got quite a complex network of circles intertwining, that it creates a really cool and desired effect, and we're not needing to make a lot of modifications to get the shape we need. So it just shows a very powerful tool and the way it's coordinating all the intersections there. So with that, I'm just going to close out that form now, and once again delete that component and come back up to my layers and switch off the circle weave, and we're going to switch on the stretch weave here. Okay, so I'm going to now select that form, and what we're going to do here is actually read in a 3D component and then stretch it along the drive rail. Okay, so let's go and import that 3D component now. In this case, it's going to be this paintbrush bit of clip art that we've got, and that's currently located in the bottom left hand corner. I'm just going to bring it into the view, and I'm just going to rotate that now. So I'm going to rotate it through just 90 degrees and apply, and then we also need to change its size. So we're going to scale this up from 5.5 roughly to 8, link XY, so we get a change in height in proportion, and I'm happy with that, and I'm just going to just pick that up now and place that up the top. So let's take a look at how we can take this sort of rather linear paintbrush and be able to map it along this curved drive rail. So I'm going to come in now and just select that single drive rail and up to the form and use selection, so we can see it's going to go from the lower point up to the higher point, and we're going to select the use component. We've only got one option in the drop down menu, and rather than fill with multiple copies, we're going to select the stretch to drive rail length. So as I select that now, I can come back in and apply. So we can see both in the 2D and the 3D view just how it's taken that 8-inch linear paintbrush and stretched it over, almost a 12-inch curved drive rail. So that looks pretty cool, but now we want to maybe combine it with another paintbrush running in the opposite direction on the other drive rail. So what I'm going to do is just reset that now and just clear the drive rails, come back in and just select those two and use those as the selection. And we can come down now to look at how we're going to weave these together. So we're using a component, but we're going to look at weave, and I think we're going to use the scale shape command rather than add base. And in this case we need to maybe look at really what those shapes should be. So I think we're going to go sort of 50 and 150, and we'll take a look at that first and just apply that. And we can see that we have a good shape, but at the moment just a little bit too much of a sort of a dipping in the under profile there. So I might want to just increase that from 50 maybe up to 75 and apply. And now we get a better effect there in the 3D view. So you can see that there's a lot of power there within this extrude and weave command, a lot of options to create some fantastic design ideas. So it really is an extremely cool modeling tool that has great scope to produce fantastic designs.